quiet hours of the night, when the world softens and the noise of the day gently fades, there is a question that has lingered for more than 2,000 years, whispered by scholars, children, wanderers, and believers alike. Who was Jesus? Beyond the stories, beyond the symbols, beyond the pages that time has polished smooth. Tonight, we invite you into a different kind of journey. Not one of debate, or doctrine, or distant history, but a journey of quiet footsteps and soft light. A journey into the heart of a man whose life has shaped the dreams, fears, hopes, and choices of billions. Imagine for a moment that Jesus is not a figure in stained glass, nor a distant miracle worker, but a human being sitting by a small fire in the cool desert night. A man with questions, a man with doubts, a man who felt joy, loneliness, exhaustion, compassion so deep it hurt. Who was he in the silent spaces, in the years the scriptures do not describe, in the private thoughts no witness ever recorded? What did he fear? What did he long for? And how did an ordinary life become a quiet revolution that changed the world? This film is not just a retelling. It is an invitation to see Jesus not as a myth, but as a living presence moving gently through a troubled world. A story told slowly, softly, like a lullaby woven through history. And if you feel this journey calling to you, this calm exploration of the man behind the miracle, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. Stories told with care, depth, and wonder. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The World Before the Light. Before the name of Jesus was ever spoken in the dusty streets of Galilee, the world into which he would be born was already trembling, stretched thin between hope and despair, fear and longing. To understand him, truly understand him, we must return to that world. A world where shadows clung to every corner, and yet where people still whispered prayers into the night. The land of Judea was a crossroads of power, culture, and tension. Rome ruled with an iron fist wrapped in velvet, offering roads, stability, and order, but demanding obedience, taxes, and silence. Soldiers patrolled the streets with practiced calm, yet beneath the surface lay the quiet threat of force. For the ordinary people, every footstep of Roman sandals was a reminder: you are not free. Families lived under constant pressure, of taxes they could barely pay, of unpredictable rulers, of violent uprisings that could erupt without warning. Parents feared for their children. Children grew up too quickly. The world felt fragile, like clay pots stacked in trembling hands. And within Jewish society itself, cracks ran deep. Different groups fought for different visions of salvation. The Pharisees clung to tradition and purity, building walls of rules to preserve identity in a changing world. The Sadducees, wealthy and politically connected, cared more for stability than transformation. The zealots simmered with rage, dreaming of rebellion and blood. Ordinary villagers simply tried to survive, caught between the demands of empire and the demands of faith. Psychologically, it was a world suffocating under the weight of expectation. The people longed for deliverance, not just from Rome, but from uncertainty, from fear, from the aching feeling that life had become too heavy to bear. They prayed for someone to speak to their pain in a language deeper than politics or ritual. Someone who could see the humanity behind the masks people wore to endure each day. Hope, however, is a stubborn thing. Even in times of darkness, it grows quietly, in whispers, in stories, in memory. Generations had spoken of a coming figure, someone who would bring clarity to confusion, healing to wounded hearts, dignity to the broken. Not everyone understood what this figure would be, or how he would appear, but the longing itself was real. A shared ache that tied people together when everything else seemed to push them apart. And so the world waited, though no one truly knew for what. In the countryside, shepherds told stories around nighttime fires. In crowded market squares, old men spoke of ancient prophecies. Mothers held their children close and prayed for gentler days. Young men stared out across the hills, wondering if they would ever know peace. The air was thick with questions, unspoken but deeply felt. Would life always be like this? Would injustice always win? Would ordinary people ever be seen, truly seen? In that emotional landscape, fragile, yearning, wounded, even a small spark could feel like a sunrise. The world before Jesus was a world aching for light. Not dramatic miracles or thunderous proclamations, but simple, human understanding. A hand on a shoulder, a voice that soothed instead of condemned, a presence that felt safe, grounding, familiar. People did not just need a savior, they needed to feel human again. And in the quiet spaces of their longing, in the heartbeat between fear and hope, something was beginning to stir. Soon, a child would be born in a quiet corner of an indifferent empire. Soon, the world would feel the first stirrings of a gentler revolution. Soon, the light would step into the shadows. Chapter 2. The Hidden Years. Long before the stories, the miracles, the parables, and the crowds, there was silence. 30 quiet years, nearly a lifetime by ancient standards, lived far from the eyes of history. These hidden years of Jesus are not gaps in the story. They are the foundation of it. They are where the man behind the Messiah was quietly shaped. Jesus was born into a family that knew both wonder and uncertainty. Mary and Joseph were not powerful, wealthy, or influential. They were ordinary people living in an extraordinary moment. Their world was small. A modest home, simple tools, the smell of freshly cut wood from Joseph's workshop, the soft rhythm of Mary's footsteps as she went about daily tasks. These rhythms of daily life, unremarkable to others, were the first sounds that shaped Jesus' earliest memories. Nazareth itself was a small village perched among hills, a place easy to overlook, a place rarely mentioned, a place where nothing great was expected to happen. Children played in dusty streets, families bartered in markets, and life moved at the pace of seasons. In such a place, Jesus learned something precious: humility, grounded not in forced modesty, but in the quiet acceptance of ordinary life. He grew up watching Joseph work patiently with his hands, smoothing wood, repairing beams, building things that would last. There is a certain psychology to manual labor. It teaches discipline, attention to detail, and the slow, steady value of creation. Perhaps this is where Jesus learned that change does not come from dramatic gestures, but from small, persistent acts of care. Mary, with her gentle strength, taught him something equally important: the quiet resilience of compassion, the power of listening, the kind of love that does not shout, but steadies. The scripture is silent about these years, but silence itself tells a story. In psychological terms, these invisible decades suggest something profound. Jesus was allowed to grow as a human being before stepping into a role that would challenge the world. He experienced the small joys: laughter with friends, shared meals, festivals under starry skies, and the small sorrows: illness, local disputes, the fragility of life in a village, constantly under economic pressure. He learned how people feel, how they think, how they hope, how they break. This is the soil from which his empathy grew. There is a tendency to imagine Jesus as a figure above human experience, untouched by the mundane. But the hidden years say something else entirely. They remind us that he lived fully inside the quiet spaces of life, long before he walked into the storms. He grew in wisdom not from books alone, but from observing people, from listening to their stories, from feeling the weight of daily struggles. This slow formation grounded him, made him approachable, gentle, a teacher who understood human frailty because he had lived among it. And then there is the silence, those decades with no recorded miracles, no sermons, no grand revelations. From a psychological perspective, silence is where identity settles. It is where purpose becomes clear. Jesus' hidden years show us a man learning patience, embracing timing, understanding that not every calling announces itself loudly. Some callings grow quietly, like seeds beneath the soil. These years also reflect a kind of divine restraint. In a world hungry for power and spectacle, Jesus' choice to remain anonymous for so long speaks to a deeper truth. He valued preparation over recognition, depth over haste. When he finally stepped into public life, he did so not as a prodigy rushing to prove himself, but as a deeply formed soul who knew exactly when the moment was right. Imagine him as a young man, standing on a hillside at dusk, watching the last rays of light fade over Nazareth. Perhaps he wondered about the future. Perhaps he felt the stirring of something greater. But he waited. He listened. he grew. The hidden years were not empty. They were essential. They were the quiet shaping of the man who would one day shape the world. Chapter 3. The Calling of a Quiet Soul. There are moments in life when a quiet soul senses a weight pressing upon it, a calling, almost imperceptible, that stirs the heart and unsettles the mind. For Jesus, that moment came not with thunder or fanfare, but in a stillness so profound that it felt like the world itself had paused. He had grown, silently, in the rhythm of ordinary days, learning his craft, helping his family, observing the lives of those around him, and yet, beneath the calm, a sense of purpose simmered, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The world around him was noisy with expectation, yet he walked in silence. He saw the injustices, the unspoken fears, the subtle cruelties that marked everyday life. People carried invisible burdens, grief, shame, hope, longing. And he recognized them one by one, as if he could see the threads that connected the human heart to the divine. It was in this awareness that Jesus felt the first whispers of his mission. A profound urge to heal, to teach, to bring light to the shadowed corners of the soul. And yet, with the awareness came solitude. The calling set him apart. He felt a gentle fear, a trembling uncertainty that accompanied any soul who understands the magnitude of what is to come. Could one man, alone, bear the weight of so many hearts? Could he speak truths that might unsettle kings and comfort the broken alike? The silence of his first 30 years had been a preparation, a slow awakening to the responsibility of listening, watching, and learning. People were drawn to him in ways he could scarcely explain. There was something in the stillness of his presence, in the quiet gravity with which he observed the world, that unsettled and comforted simultaneously. Children would approach him without fear, laying small hands upon his robes, sensing the calm beneath the surface. Adults, weighed by fear and frustration, felt compelled to confess, to question, to seek understanding in his gaze. Even strangers paused, sensing that within him lay a rare truth, someone who saw without judgment, who heard without expectation. In the fields, by the water, among crowds and solitude alike, Jesus wrestled with the tension between his own hesitation and the undeniable pull toward his purpose. Every time he glimpsed the suffering of others, the widow with no means, the sick child, the man betrayed by fortune, he felt the threads of destiny weaving through his own heart. This was not a path chosen lightly. The realization that his life would be measured not in comfort, not in acclaim, but in service, demanded courage beyond the ordinary. There was also wonder in his solitude. He imagined the ripples of small actions, the quiet revolutions of compassion. Each choice to speak, to heal, to forgive, held the potential to reach hearts far beyond the immediate moment. And even as fear lingered, fear of misunderstanding, of persecution, of failure, He felt the pull of a greater certainty, that the voice of empathy, when spoken with clarity and truth, could echo across generations. Jesus' calling was not marked by grand announcements. It was felt in the gentle tug of conscience, the awakening of empathy, and the recognition that the human heart responds to authenticity. The quiet soul does not need applause. It requires only the courage to act when the moment demands it. And in that courage, the first seeds of his ministry began to sprout. Lessons in love, mercy, and justice, taught not with force, but with presence, not with fear, but with understanding. The calling of a quiet soul is both a gift and a burden. It separates one from ordinary paths, places one in the tension between human frailty and divine expectation. And yet, for Jesus, it was also the source of profound attraction. People sensed in him a refuge, a guide, a mirror reflecting the best and the worst of themselves. And they came, drawn to the strange calm, the quiet certainty that he embodied. By the end of those first years, Jesus understood one essential truth. The path ahead would be solitary in some ways, shared in others. He would face rejection, misunderstanding, and peril. Yet he would also touch lives, inspire hearts, and offer hope in places where despair had long reigned. The quiet soul had found its calling, and the journey, both inward and outward, had begun. Chapter 4. The Teacher Who Saw into the Heart. Jesus moved through towns and villages with a quiet purpose, a presence that seemed to slow time itself. He was a teacher, but not in the conventional sense. He did not rely on grand halls or ornate robes, nor did he command with fear or authority. Instead, he taught through observation, through questions that lingered in the mind, and through parables that carried hidden truths beneath simple stories. To witness him was to feel seen, truly seen, in a way that unsettled and comforted at once. The people he encountered were not just listeners. They were mirrors reflecting their own pain, doubt, and longing. And Jesus, like a skilled psychologist, recognized the invisible scars they carried. Grief from lost children, shame from failures, anxiety from oppression, isolation from society. He spoke to those wounds gently, sometimes without a word at all, simply sitting beside a widow, letting his gaze convey understanding and empathy. His silence was deliberate, a quiet invitation for others to confront themselves, to hear their own thoughts in a space free of judgment. Parables became his most powerful tool, a sower scattering seeds, a shepherd searching for one lost sheep, a prodigal son returning home. These stories were more than moral lessons. They were mirrors into the human psyche. Listeners found themselves within these tales, recognizing their own fears, desires, and mistakes reflected in the narratives. Jesus never forced revelation. He allowed it to bloom naturally, planting seeds of awareness in the fertile soil of a conscience ready to awaken. Each parable was cinematic in its clarity, each image vivid enough to linger in the mind's eye long after the story ended. He listened with an intensity that few could match. People would speak to him, revealing secrets they had never shared, fears they had carried in silence. And he would listen, truly listen, as if their words were precious, delicate objects demanding care. There was a rhythm to his attention, a balance between hearing and allowing space that invited confession without coercion. In that space, the unspoken became visible, the invisible wounds acknowledged. Even in public settings, his perception of the human heart was uncanny. He noticed the young woman standing hesitantly at the edge of a crowd, sensing her shame before she even spoke. He recognized the man whose hands twitched with anxiety, whose eyes darted with worry, and he addressed the hidden emotion, often with a simple phrase that resonated deeply. A touch on the shoulder, a brief question, or a parable that spoke directly to their struggle. These were not acts of magic, but of acute empathy, a psychological insight honed by observation and deep compassion. Jesus' teaching extended beyond words. He healed with touch, with presence, with a look that conveyed acceptance. The sick, the broken, the ostracized, they were drawn to him not only for relief from physical pain, but for the validation of their inner experience. The leper, shunned by society, felt seen. The grieving mother, mourning a child, felt understood. The sinner, burdened with guilt, felt hope. Each act was carefully measured, tailored to the individual, as though he were reading the landscape of the human soul and applying remedies to its hidden fractures. The cinematic quality of these moments was striking. A dusty road, a crowd pressing in, sunlight glinting through leaves. And there he stood, quietly observing, waiting for the precise instant when a word, a gesture, or a story could pierce the veil of pain. There was drama in his restraint, a tension that drew attention not to himself, but to the awakening within others. Every interaction became a microcosm of human transformation, each one a testament to the power of empathy, patience, and insight. Yet his teaching was not limited to the extraordinary. Jesus noticed the small, often overlooked details of life. The anxiety of a mother struggling to provide for her children. The silent fear of a young boy learning to navigate the harshness of the world. The quiet despair of an elder abandoned by society. He attended to them all. Through attentive presence, carefully chosen words, and timely parables, he addressed the invisible wounds that society ignored, the scars that textbooks never recorded, the suffering hidden behind polite smiles. In essence, Jesus was a natural psychologist, though he did not call it that. His classroom was life itself, and his curriculum was the human heart. He revealed truths not through doctrine alone, but through experience, empathy, and an almost preternatural understanding of human motivation and emotion. In every gesture, story, and moment of silence, he offered a model of psychological insight rooted in compassion. By the end of each day, those who had encountered him carried away more than teachings. They carried a glimpse of themselves illuminated, a path toward healing. And those who watched quietly from the margins began to sense something extraordinary. That the power to change the heart does not always reside in authority or eloquence, but in presence, empathy, and the courage to see into the hidden recesses of another's soul. Chapter 5: Miracles and the Weight of Expectations. The crowds that followed Jesus often came with questions, with hope, with silent pleas for relief that they could not articulate. And, in the midst of these throngs, he performed acts that would later be called miracles. But, to understand these moments, one must look not to theology, but to the human heart, to the psychology of hope and fear, of expectation and responsibility that weighed upon both the observer and the one who acted. Each miracle carried a weight invisible to the eyes of the crowd. When Jesus healed a sick child, it was not merely the child's relief he bore. It was the anxiety of the parents, the unspoken despair that had gathered over months, perhaps years. He sensed it all, as though the burden of accumulated suffering had transferred itself to him. His empathy was a conduit, a channel through which human longing flowed, pressing on his mind and heart. The joy that followed the relief was palpable, but so was the silent exhaustion that came from carrying the emotional weight of so many lives. Psychologically, Jesus faced the constant tension between possibility and expectation. Each time he acted, people's eyes widened in wonder, their hearts leapt with hope. And yet, with every wonder came an unspoken contract. If he can do this, will he do it again for me? Will my suffering be erased? The more he gave, the heavier the expectations grew. A parent seeking health for a child, a widow hoping for comfort, a man longing for justice. They brought not only themselves, but the collective weight of their communities. To walk among them was to bear the hopes of thousands, a responsibility that was as invisible as it was immense. The psychological stakes were heightened by the unpredictability of human emotion. Gratitude, awe, disbelief, envy, skepticism, all of it coexisted in the eyes of the crowd. Some came with devotion, others with cynicism, yet all sensed, whether consciously or not, that Jesus carried something extraordinary. He felt it too. The gravity of attention, the responsibility to respond not just to immediate needs, but to the deeper, unspoken yearnings behind them. His actions were deliberate, measured, each one a dance between intuition and moral obligation. Even the simplest acts carried complexity. A moment's touch, a whispered word, a gesture of reassurance. These were small miracles in themselves, yet they demanded precision, misread a need, and one could deepen despair instead of alleviating it. Misstep in timing, and hope could falter. Each interaction required him to perceive not only the obvious pain, but also the subtle cues, the hidden fears, the emotional undercurrents that defined human suffering. His awareness was acute, his empathy all-consuming. Crowds often approached him expecting tangible change, healing, provision, protection. But he also offered something less visible, a transformation of the heart. The psychological impact of witnessing relief, of seeing the impossible made possible, was profound. It sparked hope, yes, but also reflection, a confrontation with what one believed possible in life, with faith, trust, and patience. Those who watched closely could sense that the greatest gift was not the act itself, but the awareness that suffering could be met with compassion, and that even the powerless might find agency through hope. Yet with the awe came isolation. The more miraculous the act, the more he became an object of attention rather than a participant in ordinary life. People's expectations were unrelenting, their needs endless, and Jesus felt it. The solitude of responsibility, the quiet heaviness of being seen as the one who could change the unchangeable. To touch a life was to invite reliance. To heal one person was to awaken the desire for healing in others. He carried it silently, understanding that his mission required both endurance and discernment, and that empathy without boundaries could consume the soul. He also understood the paradox of human hope. The same hope that healed could also imprison. People clung to him, seeking constant reassurance, their gaze searching for confirmation that relief would continue. But suffering would always be addressed. And he, acutely aware of human psychology, navigated each encounter with care. He did not dismiss expectation, nor did he allow it to dominate him. He engaged with the emotional reality of the moment, offering guidance, encouragement, and insight, often through stories, sometimes through quiet reflection. There were moments of quiet aftermath when the crowds had dispersed and Jesus was left alone. He would sit by a tree or walk along a dusty road, letting the weight of the day settle. The faces of those he had touched lingered in his mind. Their relief, their gratitude, their unspoken fears. Each miracle had been both a gift and a responsibility, a fleeting release of human suffering that reminded him of the profound interconnectedness of hope and despair. In this light, miracles were not simply supernatural acts. They were exercises in deep psychological attunement, demonstrations of empathy that extended beyond ordinary comprehension. They revealed the capacity of one individual to bear the weight of another's pain, to offer both relief and insight, and to awaken hope where despair had settled. And in each act, Jesus taught a subtle, enduring lesson that the human heart, when met with compassion, has the power to transform, not only for the one helped, but for the witness who dares to act with love. Chapter 6. The Final Week. A man facing his fate. The air in Jerusalem that week was thick, almost tangible, pressing down like a veil over the city. The streets were bustling, yet for Jesus, time seemed to slow. Each step he took toward the temple, each glance at the faces around him, carried a weight he had never felt before. There was a sense, unspoken yet undeniable, that the days ahead would be unlike any others, that the culmination of his journey, the test of his mission, was imminent. In the quiet of the early morning, before the city awoke fully, Jesus would walk alone, tracing familiar paths, yet seeing them anew. The stones underfoot, the olive trees bending in the wind, the distant hum of merchants preparing their stalls. All of it seemed infused with meaning. He felt each sound, each movement, as if the rhythm of life itself was speaking directly to him. And in this rhythm, he began to feel the approach of fate, a subtle drumbeat that matched the rising tension within his chest. Psychologically, there was an intricate dance unfolding inside him. Awareness and acceptance, fear and serenity, sorrow and clarity. He understood that what was coming could not be avoided. Every instinct of self-preservation, every desire to prolong life, was confronted by a deeper understanding that his purpose required endurance, that his mission demanded surrender. The awareness of impending suffering did not paralyze him. It sharpened his perception, refined his empathy, and deepened his connection to the human heart. As he met with his disciples, their faces reflected both trust and uncertainty. They could sense that something was approaching, though none could grasp its magnitude. Jesus saw it reflected in their eyes. The longing for guidance, the unspoken questions about what was right, what was safe, what was inevitable. And he felt the weight of responsibility, not only for his own fate, but for the hearts he had nurtured, for the lessons he had sown, and for the hope he had ignited. Each conversation was measured, deliberate, infused with both reassurance and preparation. At night, in the quiet solitude of prayer, he wrestled with the paradox of human vulnerability and spiritual resolve. He imagined the suffering ahead, the betrayal, the isolation, the physical pain. Yet he also felt an unwavering clarity. His mind traced the path forward with precision, contemplating each step, each choice, each interaction that would shape the final hours. The psychological tension was immense. Anticipation mingled with serenity, fear intertwined with acceptance. And yet, beneath it all, there was a profound compassion that anchored him. The weight of expectation pressed from every angle. Crowds had grown accustomed to his presence, to his wisdom, to his capacity to heal, to comfort, to illuminate the unseen corners of the human heart. And now, they would watch him face a moment from which no miracle could shield him. He sensed the eyes upon him, the whispers of anticipation, the mixture of hope and dread, and he carried it all quietly, as one carries a fragile flame. In these days, he moved with deliberate calm, performing his acts of teaching, of compassion, of subtle guidance, each gesture layered with meaning. Each parable, each word spoken, seemed to resonate on multiple levels, offering comfort, provoking reflection, preparing hearts for the reality that lay ahead. He spoke not only to the ears of those present, but to the conscience, the imagination, and the emotional core of every witness. The psychological landscape of these final days was unique. Jesus experienced a form of temporal dilation. Moments expanded, each heartbeat laden with significance. The ordinary became extraordinary. A shared meal, a conversation with a disciple, a glance toward the city walls, each imbued with an almost cinematic gravity. He perceived the fragility of life, the inevitability of suffering, and the resilience of hope, all intertwined in the fabric of existence. Even as the threat of betrayal and suffering loomed, Jesus displayed a rare emotional composure. He did not succumb to panic, nor did he mask the depth of his awareness. Instead, he embodied the tension between human apprehension and transcendental acceptance. His mind traced potential outcomes, yet he remained fully present, fully engaged, fully compassionate. This presence was not passive, it was active, a deliberate attunement to the psychological and emotional currents surrounding him. The approach of the final hours brought reflection. He contemplated the lives he had touched, the hearts he had opened, the hope he had stirred. He felt both sorrow and satisfaction. Sorrow for the pain he knew would come. Satisfaction in the understanding that his purpose was unfolding. Acceptance was not resignation. It was a conscious alignment of will, heart, and empathy with the inevitable trajectory of his mission. In these quiet, deliberate moments, one could perceive the paradox of humanity and destiny intertwined. Jesus moved toward his fate with a grace born of deep psychological insight, an awareness of fear without being consumed by it, a recognition of suffering without being paralyzed, a profound empathy that encompassed both himself and those around him. Each step, each glance, each thought was both ordinary and extraordinary, a meditation on mortality and meaning, courage and compassion. And so, the final week unfolded like a slow-motion film. Every gesture, every word, every glance carried weight, significance, and intention. Each moment revealed the depth of his psychological and emotional resilience, his understanding of human nature, and his capacity for empathy. In facing the inevitability of suffering, Jesus demonstrated a quiet heroism, a willingness to embrace fate, not with bravado, but with profound insight, compassion, and acceptance. In this delicate balance of fear, hope, responsibility, and surrender, he prepared for the culmination of his journey, a man fully human, yet profoundly attuned to the human heart, a teacher, a guide, a vessel of compassion, walking steadily toward a fate that would mark the world forever. Chapter 7. The Cross, the Silence, and the Aftermath. The morning was still. The sky hung low, a pale wash of muted light over Jerusalem, as if the city itself had paused in anticipation. For Jesus, the world had narrowed to a series of slow, deliberate moments, each breath measured, each step purposeful, each heartbeat a quiet drum counting down to the inevitable. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the weight of meaning, by the awareness of solitude, by the gravity of what was unfolding. There was no clamor here, only the hushed murmurs of those who followed at a distance, and the steady rhythm of his own heart. He moved not as one fleeing, nor as one defeated, but as one fully conscious of the path he had chosen. The cross, the symbol that would come to mark this final act. was less an object than a quiet stage upon which the culmination of a life dedicated to purpose would play out. Every thought, every gesture carried significance far beyond the physical, touching the intangible essence of humanity. Psychologically, he was acutely aware of his isolation. Even amid the crowd, there was a profound solitude. A solitude that exposed the human core, stripped of distractions, of certainty, of comfort. In this stillness, fear and acceptance intertwined seamlessly. He understood the finality of his journey, yet he also understood the permanence of the lessons embedded within it, the resilience of compassion, the courage of empathy, the quiet power of moral conviction. Those who observed him were caught in their own turbulent thoughts. Friends, disciples, and strangers alike were witnesses to a paradox. A man alone, yet profoundly present, vulnerable, yet unwavering, suffering, yet fully attentive to the hearts around him. The psychological impact of his demeanor rippled outward. It was not merely the anticipation of an ending that impressed them, but the presence of someone fully alive to the meaning of each fleeting instant. In the silence, he communicated more than words ever could. A glance, a gesture, the tilt of the head, each conveyed understanding, compassion, and reassurance. His attention was not limited to his own journey. It encompassed the observers, the ones who would carry his teachings forward, the ones who would live on with questions, grief, and hope intertwined. The human heart, he seemed to say, is capable of endurance, of empathy, of transformation, even in the shadow of loss. The aftermath was subtle but profound. Those who remained were forever altered by what they had witnessed. They felt the quiet weight of responsibility, the urging to continue a legacy not of spectacle, but of introspection, service, and moral clarity. Psychological impressions lingered. The courage to face isolation, the strength to hold on to principles amid adversity, and the insight that true leadership is not in domination, but in profound connection to the inner lives of others. Jesus' influence unfolded slowly, like ripples across water. It was not measured by applause or recognition, but by the enduring stirrings in those who had been touched by his presence. Hearts awakened to empathy, minds awakened to reflection, spirits awakened to the subtle, transformative power of witness and example. He had not merely walked among them. He had shown them how to navigate fear, sorrow, and uncertainty with composure, clarity, and love. The psychological lesson was unmistakable. Even in the deepest solitude, even when confronted with the inevitability of the end, the human heart can remain open, perceptive, and responsive. Courage is not always loud, resilience is not always visible, and impact is not always immediate. Some truths reveal themselves only in the echoes, in the lives quietly shaped by presence and example. In the days and years that followed, the memory of those moments inspired reflection, compassion, and action. The cross was no longer merely a symbol of finality, but a lens through which the enduring nature of empathy and moral courage could be understood. The silence that had accompanied the final act was not emptiness. It was a space filled with possibility, the space in which human hearts could grow, learn, and choose differently. Because they had witnessed someone embrace both mortality and meaning fully.
And so, the story of the cross, the silence, and the aftermath is not about spectacle, nor about pain in its raw form. It is about the human capacity to face the inevitable with presence, awareness, and care for others. It is about the psychological resonance of witnessing profound courage, and it is about the quiet, indelible influence that a single life, lived with purpose and empathy, can have on countless others, stretching across time, place, and generations. The city moved on, yet those who had seen, who had felt the subtle waves of presence and intention, carried the lessons forward. In that silence, in that stillness, something enduring was born. The power of a life fully observed, fully felt, and fully human.
Chapter 8. The Legacy of a Gentle Revolution. The story of Jesus did not end with footsteps fading from dusty roads, nor with the silence that followed the final act. It continued, quietly, subtly, in the hearts and minds of those who had encountered his presence, and in the echoes that ripple across generations. His legacy is not written in monuments or grandiose declarations, but in the gentle, persistent influence of compassion and human understanding. Every act, every word, every moment of attentive listening carried a lesson about what it means to be fully human. He revealed that empathy is not a luxury, but a necessity. That kindness is not a weakness, but a quiet form of strength. That seeing another person fully, their fears, their hopes, their unspoken pain, can change not only their life, but the life of the one who sees them. Psychological resonance, more than doctrine, was his enduring gift. Communities that heard him speak, that witnessed his interactions, began to shift in subtle ways. People learned that moral courage can be exercised gently, without force or coercion, and that influence comes from presence and sincerity, rather than power or command. The hearts of the weary were lifted, the lonely comforted, the lost guided not by authority, but by understanding. This was a revolution, not of armies or politics, but of perception and conscience. Even centuries later, his example continues to shape the social imagination. The principles he embodied, compassion, patience, forgiveness, remain psychological touchstones, guiding behavior, shaping ethics, and inspiring acts of generosity and moral courage. Across cultures and epochs, countless individuals have found in his life a model for navigating fear, sorrow, and uncertainty with dignity and care. The world, in subtle ways, has been transformed. A single life, lived with unwavering empathy and attention to the human heart, can ripple outward in ways that no one can fully measure. Social norms, interpersonal relationships, even the collective understanding of morality bear the quiet imprint of his example. His influence is both intimate and universal, personal yet collective, gentle yet enduring. In the stillness of reflection, one realizes that the greatest revolutions are not always loud or violent. Some are whispers, carried in acts of care and understanding. Some are seeds planted in hearts, ready to notice, ready to respond, ready to choose compassion over indifference. Jesus' life was such a seed, and the garden it has nurtured spans centuries, continents, and countless human hearts. Ultimately, his legacy reminds us that true transformation begins with seeing others fully, listening deeply, and acting with integrity and empathy. It is a call to honor the quiet power within ourselves, the capacity to touch lives, shift perceptions, and change the world in small, profound ways. And so, the gentle revolution he began continues, not as a story confined to the past, but as a living invitation to live with compassion, to understand deeply, and to shape the world quietly, profoundly, humanly. As we close this journey through the life of Jesus, we are left with a quiet, lingering question. What does it mean to truly see another human being? To listen, to understand, to respond with compassion even when it asks courage of us. His story is not only about miracles or teachings long past, but about the timeless invitation to act with empathy, to notice the lives around us, and to honor the humanity in every person we meet. The echoes of his choices ripple still, in the ways we comfort a stranger, forgive a mistake, or offer patience when it feels easier to judge. His life reminds us that true strength often speaks softly, and that the most profound impact can emerge from acts so simple they almost go unnoticed. If there's one thing to carry with you from this story, it is that every small gesture of care, every moment of understanding, is a thread in the tapestry of change. Each of us has the power to leave a gentle mark on the world, to shift hearts and minds, simply by how we live each day. If you felt the weight and warmth of this story, consider joining us on more journeys like this. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share your reflections. Because stories like these grow stronger when they touch more hearts. Thank you for listening, for being present, and for allowing the quiet lessons of history and humanity to reach your heart tonight. Until the next story, may your actions too ripple kindness into the world.